Well, here we are. It's Thanksgiving week, and I know we're not supposed to announce on these podcasts the dates and the times because of the evergreen nature of podcasts. But nonetheless, I just feel in that thankful moment. So I thought I would bring attention to that fact that we are in Thanksgiving week, and it's a great week here in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Isn't it though? This is a joy to be surrounded by your peers, to be surrounded by people who are interested in what you're talking about, and to be continuing to be curious about what you and I have been studying and working on for the last 3 decades.
Exactly, and I know that this little mini series that we're doing right now, we're looking at the domains as identified in the project management body of knowledge version 7. Last week we started that with the stakeholder domain, and this week we thought we would go actually in order and deal with the team domain. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of some of my elaborate team constructs as an IT project manager or as a member of an IT project team. And then I thought back, I said, we do team in many, many different ways. And some of the concepts that I learned about team, I think I learned as a child or as a teenager. I was quite active in sports. I played hockey, baseball, soccer, or what Europeans call football. I played basketball. I played volleyball. I ran track. So I did a lot of teamwork and individual work. And I remember especially hockey, for those people who aren't familiar with hockey, it tends to be a much more aggressive sport where you really can, as you play the same teams over and over, you can really develop animosities of the other players on the other team. And in my teenage years, we had the opportunity to play competitively as a traveling team, but the smaller towns didn't have good enough teams to do. So we ended up combining rival teams as a single team by picking a couple of lines from each team and putting them together. And here's what's amazing to me, and this is maybe something that'll come up in our conversation today. As fierce rivals, as people who loved knocking each other into the boards, suddenly we became fierce defenders of each other on the ice because now we were teammates, no longer competitors. Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that? Human behavior continues to fascinate me as we continuously go back to this survival mechanism of us versus them. We're able to constantly redefine this us. And actually, this is what compelled me to talk with you on an ongoing basis. You said this so well in our early discussions about it's us versus them. No, it's we. And it's that easy process of redefining this we that makes us able to do great things.
Absolutely. And even as I thought of my sports-minded youth, I also thought of I was involved. I think you were involved in music in high school. I was involved in a little bit of drama in high school. We couldn't put on a play without everyone knowing their parts and working together for that culmination. The culmination, of course, being that standing ovation that we all hoped for. But nonetheless, if we hadn't had our parts, right? And I think you probably had similar experiences even before you got into IT itself.
Oh, certainly, certainly. Actually, one of my favorite stories about teams and team members drove it home for me. It actually taught to me how much we have to learn about how humans behave as we learn to manage projects. So my first true job job was IT support to a major multinational corporation that didn't have IT support yet. In fact, in 1992 as a transport corporation, and they rolled IT out of finance because finance was the big iron. They were the IBM mainframes, right? And then all of a sudden we got into this distributed computing. And so they decided they needed to hire people in certain areas of the United States. And here in the Southwest, they hired about 7 of us. And my supervisor gathered us around one day and said, guess what, guys? You're going to learn how to be bosses. And he said, you're going to manage projects, but you're all going to take turns. And on this project, you're going to be the project manager. And this project, you're going to be the project manager. And lo and behold, here we are learning how to tell people what to do. And at the same time, we're turning around and we're telling ourselves, I now have to listen. And it was really interesting to see the dynamics change. I thought I was going to have a problem with the shift, but like you, with the animosity between sports teams, it's the same way. It was easy transition because the project manager was just another job to be done to get the project done. And that's all it was. And so we were able to work as a group. And this continued for the next 5 years. We just rotated through project manager. It was an assignment. It really wasn't a job title.
And maybe that's the key, right? It's that, yes, we have competition and competition is healthy, but when you're part of the same team, you're all rowing in the same direction to try to get to that same goal. And so then as a result of that, you have to put those animosities and those old rivalries aside. And it's all a good thing. I came across this definition of a team.
Oh, good.
And I thought as we were preparing for this, I looked at this. It's defined as a group of people who perform interdependent tasks to work towards accomplishing a common mission or a specific objective. And as I thought about that, that is exactly right. When going back to the high school hockey team, several of us played forward on the offense, several played defense, several played, well, one or two played goaltender. Each of us had our specific jobs. Each of us had our specific skills, but we all went for that same objective, and that was to win the game with the team working together. And so part of that also meant that you, as a person carrying the puck forward to the opposing team's goal, didn't mean that you were always the one to take the shot. A lot of times team members passed off to another team member to give them a better opportunity to take it across the line. So there's a lot of learnings even from our past times that weren't involved in project management per se.
Yeah, Agile talks about this really well too. They talk about a team member as being a general specialist. I love that term. And that is actually encroaching into general project management too, where you have a specialist, somebody who has a skill, who has general skills that allows them to work with each other. And like you said, the forward has their skills, the blocker and defender have their skills, and they know how to use their skills to support each other. It's more of a sense than an assignment. It's a feeling. It's a visceral feeling of getting to the point in a group where you're able to not have to look over your shoulder and everybody has your back while you have theirs.
No, that's a great analogy. Somehow I'm thinking that this podcast is going to be one of storytelling by illustration as opposed to bringing up a lot of theory and experience.
You and I enjoy theory, but at the same time, stories allow us to show how this stuff works. And that's the other thing that I think that we're going to be carrying forward a lot. We talk about these items not because they're good theories and they sound nice, but they really work.
Well, they work, and quite often there's been times that you and I have challenged respected theory based on experience and based on actual storylines that we've brought forward. So let me ask you this as we continue forward, going from the general to now a very specific to IT project management itself, where we're managing, whether it's a data center like much of your experience or large systems development like in my experiences. So what is some of your earliest experiences that you can think of in terms of working with team, either as managing the working of the team or being a member of the team that's being managed?
I'll go back to the transportation company because it was really daunting. Here I was, maybe 26 or 27 years old, and I'd have people my age who were technical specialists, and then I'd have managers from the different transportation. They were a box mover company, the different transportation centers, and then the crusty old drivers who delivered the boxes. And the drivers actually were part of a union. And here I was 26 or 27 years old, and I had to figure out quickly how to sort things out and how to give people what they needed. Luckily, I was working with the last generation of the 1940s through 1970s mindset of systems thinking and systems engineering, where these guys had built up a couple of decades of patience and they were willing to help me sort things out and then get everything in place. So I would have, if I had a team of 10 to 14 people, I'd have like 4 or 5 mentors I could pull on. It was a beautiful experience. I wish everybody had this type of a growing into management and business.
Well, and I commend those people that helped you, because that mindset, as I understand it, from the I think you said 40s through the 70s, was not necessarily conducive to being mentor. Typically, it was like very autocratic, and you do what I say and don't ask questions. So yeah, I commend them, and I commend you for asking for that mentorship as well.
Well, it was basically they had it, and you look at the business, and the business shapes the people a lot of the time. And it shapes management too. Just as management shapes business, business shapes management. And one of the things I noticed, and this is what taught me how to be a great consultant, you have to drop into a corporation, quickly understand their culture, and figure out what needs to be done. And this was the beautiful thing. I was watching these people who would work really early in the morning for 3 hours and push. They'd yell at each other, and then when they got things done, they went out for breakfast. And in the afternoon, guess what happened? The same thing. Rush, and yell at each other, and they got things done. And it was it wasn't projects and project management that shaped this attitude and the behavior. It was the work the people did, plus the attitude they bring to the work, that made it such a wonderful environment.
See, and that's what I'm taking away from that. You're not advocating that we sit there and yell at each other during the day. What you're saying is that people I think what you're saying, and what I'm hearing, is that people were passionate enough about getting the job done,
Yeah.
that they encouraged each other loudly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Conflict.
Yeah.
Conflict was not something that you shoved under the rug. And confrontation was a tool to help solve people quickly. And the thing was, this is where I learned this. A bunch of 30 through 55-year-old industrial engineering managers actually taught me that confrontation is a way to raise an issue. You don't confront people, you confront issues. And yeah, you're going to be passionate about it. And yeah, sometimes other people are passionate about it too, but you don't take that passion personally, because there is an agreement in the team that we confront the problem, not the people. So yes, tempers flared and voices were loud, and people actually worked together through that. It was a joy to behold.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience with some of my peers in consulting, and particularly when I did some oversight work of a corporation, where that corporation, folks in that corporation and I used to work together. And we would have some Donnybrook discussions. I mean, where we would just, but we would go out afterwards for a beer, and it was like nothing happened. But the idea, and we talked about it once in a while, and the idea was we were both passionate, or several of us, we were passionate about doing the best possible job for our client. And sometimes that caused us to really really get involved loudly, but never, as you were saying, we never took it personally, ever. It was always for the benefit of our common client.
Yeah, and we watched out after each other because we know at the end of the day, if it wasn't for all of us working together, that miracle could not occur.
Well, and that's the important part of this. We were in different organizations, but we were a team. So team doesn't necessarily mean you're all part of the same organization. You're also part of the team. The client personnel who are working with you are part of that team. The whole idea is that you're moving forwards to meet the objective, the final objective of that particular project. I remember when my very first team management experience, I was green, much like you in my late 20s, was thrown into the situation. And I think you and I have talked about this before, where my expectation of every person on that team was to give 110% like I expected myself to do. And so therefore, when that didn't happen, I became more autocratic than trying to understand the needs of those teams. And here's what I think: back in those earlier days, I don't think we had adequate training in terms of what it really means to lead teams. We were thrown in. It's like, I think I've used the illustration before. When I was 6 years old, I learned to swim because my dad threw me in the deep end of the river. And so you learn to swim that way. And it's not a good way to do things.
I can demonstrate that although we think all of our job is to just get in there and sort things out and manage and direct, right? But yeah, there's that nuance of human behavior that takes, I would say it takes decades to really, really become an expert in. And
Yeah.
it is a tough learning experience because you learn it mostly through mistakes. You can do a lot of theory on leadership, you can do a lot of theory on management even, but until you get your hands around it and wrap around it and you care about it and you want to do it right, and you're willing to go through 3 or 5 or even 9 times of doing it wrong, that's when you start getting good at it.
Well, I think this is also what helped me was that on the one hand, even though I didn't go through any kind of training, I did, after failing a few times at meeting my team's needs, and not failing at the project, but failing at just having that good, well-oiled machinery moving forward. One of the things I did was I went to a mentor. I got some mentorship. And in doing so, I was able to lead through their experience, meaning the mistakes they made, they cautioned me against. The victories they had, they encouraged me to emulate those. So theory, as you were saying, is one thing. Yes, there's management theory, there's leadership theory, and we should pay attention to that. Don't ever stop reading good books, but get yourself a mentor, because they're going to help you through the actual experience, the life experience of what it means to lead a team.
Yes, yes, indeed. So here's a question for you. When was it you actually sat up and looked around and said, hey, I'm actually leading this team? What was that like?
I think it was, I've had several such experiences, and I'm anxious to hear yours as well. But I remember very specifically in one situation, I was I'd have people come to my office, leave the door open, sit back, and just want to have conversation, either about the events of the day or things that were happening. But in that conversation, we're also able to try to get from me certain ideas as to how they should be conducting themselves. So it was one of those things where my open door truly was an invitation. Many of my peers at the time managing their teams, people would bypass their doors. In fact, I had people from other people's teams coming to my door and asking for advice. So at that point, I realized that something in the way I was treating those people made sense to them, and they sought that kind of companionship on the project.
Very good. Yeah, mine was a little different. So I went from transportation industry to state government. and I was an IT manager for about 3 years. And I was the IT director of a small state agency. And then for the 2 last years I was in state government, I was a contractor to the same agency. And then I moved into consulting with a multinational corporation. It was manufacturing. And it was really strange. Each one of these areas had totally different cultures, but in consulting, it was really weird because you had to adapt and adapt and adapt. For 7.5 years, I did this fairly effectively. And then after that rolled out, I went into, I spent 5.5 years, I guess, in marketing. But one of the team members I had worked on in consulting was also over with me in marketing. And we were creating new business products, right? New products for the office and the environment. And we were working on stuff that was going to be released in 5 or 6 years. So it was a lot of exploration. And he left me a comment after I left the corporation. And he said, Tim, it's like he's the named project manager, but it doesn't look like he does something, but he just walks through the room and everything just works really well. It's just his presence that makes things work well. And I was thinking, I'm doing something right. I'm not being obtrusive. And I got to figure out what this is because I want to bottle it.
That's right. I remember one situation where it was a situation where I was doing oversight on a project, and my contract had come to an end, and I decided to move on to another agency to monitor another contract. And interestingly enough, the team over which I was providing oversight threw a big party for me at the end, not because I was leaving. Goodbye, see ya. Here's a party. Don't let the door hit you in the back when you on your way out. But what they did was we had this incredible fun time one evening, and here's where I knew I was doing something right, even though I was in the oversight role. Is there was a lineup of consultants from the other team that were lined up to speak to me, not to wish me well, which they would anyway, but to how do I do this so I can do what you do?
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And again, it's not something that you pursue. It's something that happens as a byproduct of the work, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a result of just doing work correctly.
Well, and you know this as well. Many people probably don't understand, but from a consulting perspective, to get my next job, I have to have good references. And good references don't come just by, we have this North American phrase called brown nosing, which is sucking up to the client to get to be on their good side. No, a good reference comes from doing a good job, and a good reference gets that next job. And so I have had very little trouble getting good references for each new job that I applied to contract with. And so as a result of that, I think again that there was proof in that pudding that I had done something right on behalf of the client in those situations.
Let's move on to another one. Let's talk about servant leadership. Let's just play with the idea right now. How does servant leadership work, and how does it help that team function?
Well, if I remember correctly, servant leadership was a phrase or a term coined by a gentleman by the name of Robert Greenleaf.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the difference between a servant leader and a person who was leader first. In other words, the difference between someone who wanted to serve and someone who wanted to lead, and that difference. So the person who wants to serve naturally wants to bring the people alongside and bring them along with him or her. I think the people who wants to lead first is that type of person that probably has some unresolved egotistical. No, that's unfair. But I think people who want to lead first, but no matter what happens, those people take not as good care of their teams as the servant leader might.
Right, right. It's a sacrifice.
It is. Yeah,
If you
that's a
look
good
at the
way of putting it.
definition
Yeah.
of servant leadership, it's putting the good and it's putting the rights of the group over the rights of the individual. Actually, who was it? Just a second here. Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek talks a lot about leadership and servant leadership, and he said, "Yeah, the leader is the one who jumps into the battle first, but he jumps into it with a shield, not a sword, and he's doing it to protect the others." And that's what we do. We create that safe space. I'm talking about creating an environment where you don't have distractions and you don't have disruptions from your work, and everybody has what they need to get the work done.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the servant first leader versus the leader first leader, you can think of those as if they're completely absorbed in those two sides. There's the two sides of this extreme, and somewhere in the middle, we all fit there. A lot of that depends on human behavior and how it is that we react or act with people. And so, as a result of that, I think the person who works more on the servant leadership side ends up with better results because the entire team is absorbed in that goal. Whereas on the leader, we talked before about the autocratic style of past decade leaders. They tended to be leader first. Do as I say, no questions asked. This is what we're going to do. And if it doesn't work out, it's not my fault, right? It's one of those kinds of things. And again, I'm doing the negative side, the extreme side, but that's what the connotation comes up when you think of leader first versus servant first.
Yeah, and what's beautiful is if you go into the body of knowledge in the process group practice guide, they say, well, project management is a unique craft. And they say you have to have a combination of management and leadership. And they define management as telling people what they need to get done, capturing the data, analyzing, and making appropriate changes. There's nothing negative about it, right?
Yeah.
There really isn't. It's just go over to that corner, pick up a box, move that box and set it over there. And take the data and say, hey, you did better this time than you last time. That's management, okay? Management is good. Management keeps the business running, right? It actually creates a consistent, repetitive output with improvement. Leadership is not that tactical part. That leadership is what you're talking about from a servant leadership standpoint, which is focusing more on the relationships and the work, creating the environment where you can actually make sure the information flows and the changes applied are appropriate changes, and you're constantly looking for innovations that you can use.
Well, exactly. I mean, you may have been on my team at one time, or I may have done what you're doing on my team at this time. It doesn't mean I can still do that. But I have to be able to get the impediments and the obstacles out of the way so that you can do it now, because we're all in this together. So it's one of those things where you, as a servant leader, you always are looking for the needs of your team members to help them get over their obstacles, get around their impediments, and just keep going.
And that brings up another thing. 3 times in my career, yeah, 3 times in my career, I've had that team where I looked at them and I said, wow, what am I doing here? What am I supposed to do? And actually I knew it was one of those dream teams, right? Because near the end of the project, we talked about the fact that we just worked so well together. How many times have you had a team like that? And did you ever feel that you were just like an extra wheel on the wagon?
I've probably had it, and I'm going back 40 years in my career. I've probably had it 2 times, 3 times where I've had that true, what you would call a dream team, just a well-oiled machine moving forward. Not to say that my other teams were not somewhat, didn't have some characteristics of a dream team, but in terms of just that well-oiled functioning machine where every day was just a joy to come to work, probably 2 or 3 times. And I just look back at those situations. Was I an extra? No, I was in there. Had my sleeves rolled up and I was right along with them. So I didn't feel like I was an extra cog. But from a leadership perspective, all I did was just look ahead and see what the impediments were, get those out of the way, and just keep moving forward.
Yep, exactly. It actually frees you up. Again, delegation and the ability to help your team members step up and take accountability and responsibility means that it frees up your time to do even more interesting things. I found myself moving more into a strategic, more executive role on my projects, which I really enjoy. But it took the establishment of really solid relationships and an understanding. Basically, I had to describe to a lot of people, project managers can do this too if you want, and actually bringing in executive coverage or bringing in these innovations, not maybe in technology and work and implementation, but in just the understanding and the communication of the objective and the value and these items that we sometimes don't have a lot of time to work on.
Well, that's exactly right. And going back to those descriptions of that well-oiled machine, it struck me that those teams, all team members, were working as servant leaders themselves, even though they weren't in those leadership positions.
This is fascinating to me. I had this question for like about 10 or 12 years as I was teaching project management. I was studying leadership and I was studying servant leadership. And I was thinking to myself, what if I had a team who was all leaders and servant leaders? Would they get in the way? And I could not, for the life of me, create an example where they get in the way because of the nature of servant leadership. Now, here's the thing. Do you think everybody on a team can be a leader?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to dispel this myth of born leader right now, because yes, there are people who may have, as a result of life experience or the way they were reared at home, they may have developed some earlier leadership characteristics that carried forward into their careers. But I don't think anyone is born a natural leader. I think you aspire to it, you work towards it, but it's you want it. You have to want it. And again, I've been on teams where I've had staff members who just want to stay in this one area. Maybe they want to be a technician for their entire career. They never aspire to ever leading a team. That's great. But for those who aspire, yes, absolutely, they can reach that, whatever pinnacle of leadership they want, by practicing, by experiencing, by understanding theory, by understanding practice.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because if you look up in the 7th edition of the PMBOK, I haven't found source in the 6th edition. I haven't even gone back there yet, okay? But I don't remember 6th edition or before talking this way. But the 7th edition PMBOK says leadership is for everyone. And it doesn't just say it in one paragraph. I don't know why they have this embracing of this concept of leadership as just another human skill everybody can take advantage of.
Well, and I think part of that is PMI naturally grew up, even as we grew up, in the era of you need to have good tools, you need to have good techniques, you need to have good process. And that reflected itself all the way through the 6th edition. I think the 7th edition also stayed aligned with what we're seeing all through all kinds of different project orientations, and that is to bring in the more people-centric aspects of what it means to work on projects and to run teams. So I think PMI is just staying abreast of what the industry is experiencing right now with its people-centric approach to project management.
Yeah, I agree. This is something very compelling. I've seen this as a message throughout all of my other studies of business and management and so forth. And now in the project management environment, they're actually validating it too. I started seeing hints of this outside of the PMBOK in other literature when in 2015, when they brought out the talent triangle, where they said, you're going to have to pay attention to leadership in business. It's part of the skill set of project manager. But then when they started talking to the Agile Alliance, I think there was some cross-pollination there, or they were waiting for the time to integrate Agile into the project management framework so they could actually use these concepts very effectively. And they do.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I remember years ago managing teams where my instruction to my technicians and my systems analysts was, you're going to know the business as well as our client knows their business. Because up until then, there was an expectation that the client had to learn IT in order to be effective on projects. And if they didn't learn IT, well, we IT professionals just had our way with whatever we decided to put into the system, right? But when my teams understood the client's business as well as the client understood their own business, we ended up with far better products when we were finished that project.
That's a tenet of consulting. In order to provide a service or create a deliverable more than once, you have to do it such that it is meaningful and valuable for the people you're giving it to. It's their deliverable. It's not yours. You're just a steward, right? And so that actually was a relief to me when that was actually brought up as a principle in the 7th edition. And if we look at this domain, these principles of leadership and stewardship really ring true when it talks about both what we talked about last week, the stakeholders and our teams. They're not ours. We don't own them. We're there for the certain amount of time. And it's our job to actually, just like when you're hiking, when you leave the campsite at the end of the project, you make sure it's that way or better. So the next year that you come over, maybe it's even nicer.
Well, and I think going back to a lot of what you were asking earlier, can all team members be leaders? And this fits into this entire discussion that we're having right now. But I think it comes down to, when we think of leadership, at least you and I, based on our age, when we think of leadership, we tend to think of the old terms of rank and authority. But I think with the PMBOK 7th edition and with some of the industry's more understanding of the people-centric view of managing teams, I think rank and authority, although they have their place, rank and authority must also acquiesce to coming alongside and being that servant leader and being that person that understands the needs and the aspirations of their team members even before their own.
It's funny because what you just said actually brought up two things in my head simultaneously. Number one, ethics. It's the right thing to do. It's part of human nature. A leader leads. A leader is responsible. A leader makes sure everybody in the group is successful. Marcus Aurelius said it, right? He said, what's bad for the beehive is bad for the bee. And that's the way a leader thinks. We think that this is something that's new and fresh and relevant. I think it's cyclic. I think there are times when this becomes really important and everybody needs to talk about it in public. And sometimes it's not so important. This is the way Aristotle looked at it. He said there are 3 levels of leader, right? He talked about a nation and a king, right? And he said there are 3 phases that every king goes through. They start off saying, I'm doing it because I want everybody to see I'm doing it. That's your ego-driven one, right? That's the one you're thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we mature, he says, you know what? I do it because it's the right thing to do. I'm conscious of wrong or right, and I feel morally obligated because I want to actually do what's right. And then he said there's a third level. And that third level says, I can't do it any other way. It's part of my nature as a human being. And this is how we mature. We've had this knowledge for 2,500 years or longer, and we've talked about it and we've recognized and valued it. What is happening now is it's becoming formal and public in a very broad area of our business.
And that's a good thing. I recall just a little while ago, I watched a YouTube video of a marathon race, and a person who was nearing the finish line was stumbling and falling and was not going to make it. One of their competitors, or you could say one of their co-runners, in this case, one of the team runners, stopped in their tracks to cross the finish line, went back, picked this person up, and basically stumbled across the line with the person who had nearly fainted. And I thought, when I was looking at this, isn't that exactly the picture that we're trying to do? Is that, yes, we can cross that line and to the cheers and the accolades of those around us, or we can stop and make sure that all of our teammates cross the line together at the same time. And it was just such a profound picture of what that person, and you mentioned ethics, and you mentioned because it's the right thing to do and it's because of who I am. That runner to me displayed exactly what you just said. It's who they were. They needed to stop and help their teammate across. And in this case, the teammate wasn't truly a competitor, but they had to help them across because it was the right thing to do. And that's who they were.
And that's what we mean by servant leadership right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
we're getting philosophical in our old age.
Yeah, we're again, we started off by saying we're storytelling and we're talking about facts and what we experience. We're not going to talk about theory. And here we are talking about philosophy. It's fascinating.
What about one subject, and we've got a few minutes left. Can we touch a little bit about high performance teams, or do you think there's more to
Yeah,
talk?
we can. High performance teams is really an interesting concept. We used a dream team.
Yeah.
Right. And we didn't really talk about what a dream team is. They function well, they're mature, they focus on the work, they have responsibility, accountability. And the question is, what is a high performing team? We use that term, but we don't understand really what that means. Is it the same as a dream team, or do you see that with a little extra definition?
I think a high performing team can become a dream team. I think that's how I would put it. So you've got individuals selected for their specialized skills. You've got who also complement other individuals with specialized skills, and they're all goal focused. And so when they're all marching in the same direction and all of their skills fit together like tightly, perfectly constructed Lego pieces, and they all attain the objective at the same time, to the satisfaction, to the delight perhaps of their client, that to me is a high performing team who has become a dream team.
I'd add something to that.
Sure.
They want other people to force them to step up. Okay. In a relationship, you know you're in a good relationship when you say to yourself, I can't let them down. I'm not going to be late. I'm not going to do something that's wrong. I want to be the best type of me I can be at all times. Okay. That's part of what a high performing team is. And they take it to where you're going which is everybody is focused on the objective. Everybody is focused on, yeah, I have my opinion, but it's more important that we go in the direction of group, because I'm not as smart as the collection of group, and I trust the way we make decisions as a group. I really look forward to people who raise an issue and actually confront me and say, you can do better, because it's an opportunity for me to outdo what I was yesterday. Go ahead.
And the other thought of that too is, and I've been part of these kinds of teams where you have these highly specialized skills that interleave with other highly specialized skills, and they all have that common goal focus. But here's what's interesting is those people who are on the team, perhaps younger ones who haven't quite yet learned the meaning of really high functioning teams, who aren't as goal focused, it's interesting how they get pulled along, and suddenly you see the light go on in their faces, and their activities pick up, and they stay a little extra time after work to get something else done, and they go to the after work dinner so that they can be part of that great focus of making sure that we're going to satisfy the client. So it's sort of contagious.
Yes, it is.
High performance is contagious.
Yeah, we need to talk about this, and we don't have time to talk about this, but actually, if you study the physical nature of humans and the physiology, and you get into the actual neurotransmitters that drive our behavior, what you're explaining, especially with the younger team members, and this goes back to my experience with the crusty old managers who are being patient with me. Actually, it's demonstrated that bringing these people along and taking care of them releases oxytocin, which is the same neurotransmitter that's released when you first hold your baby. Isn't that weird?
It is. And I'll tell you what used to release what did you say?
Oxytocin.
What used to release mine was I would walk into a room where I might have one or two teams working, and over at the whiteboard, there's 3 people working on a problem. And over here, there's a programmer, a developer having problems, and they've got 2 people looking over her shoulder to help her with their particular problems. And back over here, someone has the client. They're explaining to a client representative what's going on and asking good questions. And the whole buzz is happening in such a way that you just know the tasks are being performed to advance the project. There's not a wasted minute in all of those conversations and activities going on.
The way we are structured and the way we are functioned, if we can just understand it and not manipulate it, not use it for manipulation, but use it to influence and guide and even understand ourselves what's going on, so people can more naturally and more comfortably actually not just get things done, but enjoy it.
And you and I have both been what would I say, the products of successful projects. And there is nothing like, whether it's a 6-month project or a 6-year project, to deliver that final product over time to a client in a way that delights that client or that end user or whoever it is. There is nothing more exciting. When I've retired more than once. This is a secret that I don't tell a lot of people. But I'll tell you what, I come back and people go, why'd you come back? Because it's in the blood.
It's part of our nature. That's the key. It's naturally part of us. Yes, a lot of these things are learned behaviors and habits, but so much of it is programmed into us. Our survival mechanisms, our group mechanisms, how we function, how we've thrived over the last 500,000 years, and an understanding of both sides of it is what allows us to work well as teams and groups and guide, lead, and support healthy teams and groups.
So for those people who are listening to us who want to aspire to leading small teams, large teams, huge teams, whatever that is, can we summarize how we would having now listened to us, how we would advise them on how to establish their career such that they can attain those aspirations of team leadership?
I'll start off with a very basic and general set of instructions. Number one, try some experiments. Don't do it in areas of your project or your work where you could create disaster, but do it in small areas. And try some of these things out. Be curious. Ask why. Get them to talk about their work. Get them to talk about what they like and what they enjoy. And also measure. Measure and inspect and analyze and try to predict. Just the standard project management skills. But don't do it just in schedule, scope, and quality and risk and budget, but do it in, are they actually having conflicts, and how long are these conflicts lasting? And are they using some general good conflict management skills? And again, keep score and maybe start inserting yourself in, not intrusively, but just slowly saying, guys, there's a good way to get this done. If you need me, I'm over here, but I have a bunch of tools that will be really helpful in what you're trying to get done.
It's interesting because I just read something about Jay Leno, who here in the US was a late night show host of a TV, and he was a comedian. And so a lot of his hosting was comedic in value. And it's interesting to me is before he ever told a joke on national TV, he would go down to the local comedy stand-up store or area, and he would just do open mic night and practice some of these. And if he got groans from the audience, he wouldn't use it on TV. So it's interesting what you just said. Try some things out in areas that may not affect your performance on the project itself, but try some things out.
Yeah. And here's the secret. If it doesn't work, fine. Yeah. Try it again. Try it again. Try it again. Because what we're talking about is good practice, which means we've been doing it this way. And a lot of people have been doing this way, and people have been writing about it, doing it this way for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not that you're doing it right or wrong. Maybe this stuff has a little bit of nuance that you have yet to learn, and that's the only difference.
Well, and I think the frustrating part of us, for people like us who've been around for a while, that nuance also is different depending on the team you're leading. Something could work with one team and not another.
Yeah, and even if you've been teaching projects or working with projects or managing or advising projects, every day is different.
And I think if I were to add, and just as we close this out, I think the other two things that I would add is never stop learning and get a good mentor.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Make sure that those couple of things are in your, and you will attain to the level that you want to attain to.
Indeed. So we're going to get back to a regular schedule and enjoy ourselves, and you won't even notice. And we will be continuing to talk about this, and in the weeks to come, we'll start talking about our next season and what you can expect to be hearing from us. If you have questions or if you have anything you'd like us to talk about, there's always comments. Or you can talk to us directly. Where can we reach you if we want to say hi, Merv?
Well, we're both on LinkedIn, and I think that's probably the best place for professionals like yourselves to find professionals like ourselves and have those good conversations.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, thanks again. This has been a joy. Looking forward to another conversation next week.
You bet. All right.